Greetings, comrades! As you know, Peter the Great is one of the most respected rulers in Russian history, the last Russian Tsar and the first emperor of the Russian Empire. This man started a new era in the life of the country. His reform activities extended to all areas of Russian life. Peter had a big heart. He loved many things. He loved drinking, Europe, navy ships, playing war games, swamps, German dresses and a bunch of other things. But there was one thing Peter hated with all his heart. The thing was the traditional Russian beard. Why did he hate facial hair so much? So much that Peter imposed a tax on it and sometimes personally cut it off from anyone who happened to be nearby. Let's find out. Let's start by clarifying a few things. This story is fascinating not only because it sounds like one of the most idiotic laws in history, but also because beards have always been sacred to Russian people. And I'm not exaggerating. Taking away a Russian man's beard is like denying Brazilians a carnival, stopping the English from drinking tea at 5 o'clock, or banning the Italians from using this gesture. A massive beard from temple to temple was a decoration of a man, a sign of manhood, and a symbol of devotion to the Orthodox faith. At the time of Yaroslav the Wise, the damaging of someone's beard was punished with a fine. At the time of Ivan the Terrible, shaving was considered a grave sin which could not be washed away by the blood of all the great martyrs. The rules for wearing a beard were stated in the decisions of the Staglavy Sabor. Forced shaving was considered to be a terrible humiliation, an insult, a disgrace. The church was resolutely against it, and the common people followed suit. Nevertheless, Peter decided to take this step. Why? Like many other things, Peter the Great brought this idea with him from Europe. It has long been believed that Peter I signed the decree that condemned millions of people to moral suffering on August 19, 1698, the day after his return from the Great Embassy, his famous diplomatic mission in 1697-1698, during which the young autocrat not only signed important treaties and entered some coalitions, but also became familiar with the life and customs of advanced European countries. Allegedly, he explained it this way: I wish to transform both the secular goats, that is, citizens, and the clergy, that is, monks and priests. The first, without their beards, would resemble the Europeans in kindness, and others, maybe even with beards, would teach Christian virtues to the faithful in the churches, just as I have seen and heard the pastors teaching in Germany. However, this is probably not entirely true. In the monumental and very detailed compilation The Complete Collection of Laws of the Russian Empire, which covers the period from 1649 to 1913, there is no decree about this subject. Not from August 19th, 29th, or any other date in 1698 or 1699. Perhaps there was such a decree, but it has not been preserved in the archives. The first available document which directly regulates the wearing of beards appeared only in 1705. It is dated January 16th and is called On Shaving Beards and Moustaches to People of All Ranks, except Priests and Deacons, on taking a tax from those who do not want to do this, and on issuing badges to those who pay the tax. The Tsar's decree of 1705 set strict rules for those who did not want to fulfill the requirement to shave. The cost of the beard was most expensive for merchants, 100 rubles per year. For ordinary townspeople it was 2 times cheaper. And it was much easier for peasants. They were obliged to pay 2 money per beard only if they went in and out of town, though not once a year but at every entry and exit. That is, if they lived in a village, they could pay no tax at all. To give you an idea of how high the fee for the beard was, suffice it to say that 30 rubles in those days was the annual salary of the streltsy, and merchants were obliged to pay 100 rubles. Later, Peter has issued several more decrees. In 1713 he forbade not only to wear a beard, but also traditional Russian clothing. The decree of 1714 directly said that for such a crime the violators would be severely punished and exiled to katorga, and their movable and immovable property would be taken by the great sovereign without any mercy. The tax for those who still refused to shave increased every single time too. And Peter himself often performed the execution of the facial hair. Along with his jesters, he walked the streets, captured the boyars, and took them out of their sleigh to cut their beards and kaftans. Sounds like some bad joke, but I'm absolutely serious. There are even known cases of suicides of those who did not want to obey the new law. That is, some Russian people really believed that it was better to be dead and with a beard than alive and without it. And one of the most interesting recollections of this time was left by John Perry, a British engineer in Russian service, in his book The Condition of Russia under the Present Tsar. The Tsar came to Voronezh, where I was serving at that time, and many of my employees, who had worn beards all their lives, were obliged to part with them. One of the first people I saw returning from the barber was an old Russian carpenter, whom I had always been particularly fond of. I made a joke, assuring him that he had become a young man and asking him what he had done with his beard. He replied by putting his hand inside his clothes and pulling his cut beard out. He showed it to me and told me that when he came home he would hide it so that it could be placed with him in his coffin and buried with him, so that when he appeared in the next world he could present an account of it to Saint Nicholas. Nevertheless, Peter was successful in his crusade against beards. The edicts themselves lasted for another 50 years after him, and for over 100 more years beards were not in vogue in Russia. Only Emperor Alexander III changed their attitude to the beard and wore it himself. So, where did Peter's aversion to beards come from? According to one version, Peter's personal hatred of beards stemmed from the fact that his own just did not want to grow. And if the Tsar did not have a beard, then no one else should either. Other versions sound more plausible though. First, yes, Peter wanted Russia to be seen in Europe not as a gathering of dirty, hairy barbarians, but as a new pillar of civilization, an enlightened and cultured country. And Peter really wanted the Russian people to look a little more like Europeans. That is why he made them abandon the traditional Russian clothes and ennoble their faces. Long traditional kaftans were cut just as vigorously as beards were. Secondly, Peter really wanted to prove his power over the boyars and the church, the main supporters of beards. The church had enormous power at that time, and the memories of Patriarch Nikon, who has caused a schism in the Russian church, were still fresh. So the decree about shaving beards was a kind of a demonstration of power, showing that it was he, Peter, who had absolute authority over everyone, and the church could not command him. It was the same with the boyars. Peter was well aware of their power, after all he was not ascended to the throne without their assistance, and deep down he rightly feared that one day they might overthrow him. This is why Peter strengthened the army, and many of his reforms were directed against the nobility, to weaken their influence. The shaving of the beard was a tool to show the boyars where exactly they belonged. And finally, the financial aspect. It sounds ridiculous, but it was really a good tool to replenish the treasury. A lot of money was asked for the right to wear a beard, but everyone who could afford to pay off did exactly that, because losing a beard was a disgrace and a grave sin. So for almost 20 years, Peter was able to finance the Great Northern War, which ended in an unconditional defeat of Sweden. So, I'm sorry Swedes, but perhaps you lost your great power status just because of some piece of facial hair. Well, millions and millions of pieces of beards. Or maybe Peter was just a giant, arrogant prick, and there was no secret purpose for this beard law. Maybe he just dreamed of taking someone by the beard and cutting it off since he was a little kid. Who knows?